Okay, we are recording. Hi, I'm
Hello.
Ron. That's Amy.
I'm Amy. Hi.
The reason for this video is to talk about Thane Brooks Miraculous healing, a notable miracle. In the Bible, there are miracles and then there are notable miracles. Thane's mom, had a notable miracle. So, introduce yourself.
I am Amy Brooks. I've been Ron's friend for a lot of years, and in fact, he probably remembers quite a bit about Thane when he was a baby and our journey. But there's so much to unpack. I'm really excited to share this with you guys.
Okay, so let's go. Okay, so people who are watching, start, you get married
Hmm.
and you have some children,
Yep.
and then start from Thane.
Yep. So Thane was my third child. My pregnancies before that had been pretty easy. Mine with him was a little bit more complicated. I had a lot of pain in my body at the time. I didn't know that I, at the time, had systemic lupus, which I've
Mm,
now been healed of, which is a whole other healing story that we might do on here. But I had went in for an ultrasound to see how far along I was. The pregnancy was unexpected. I was on a progesterone only pill to avoid pregnancy and still got pregnant. I was also nursing my second son still. He was only 15 months old when I got pregnant. So I went in for an ultrasound. They told me that there was an abruption where the umbilical cord implanted, and there was actually a large blood clot there. And they weren't sure if I would be able to carry the pregnancy, but there was really nothing they could do about it. And either I would carry Thane to term and have a baby, or I wouldn't. I would miscarry. So I didn't have any more ultrasounds. On the day he was born, I knew something immediately was wrong because my doctor wouldn't let me see him right off the bat. I had a very sweet doctor who was a Christian man, and we had been friends for many years. And he just kind of got down in my face and he said, Amy, he said, Thane's got some problems. He said, I can't tell you yet what all is going on, but he does have some birth defects. And he said, we will begin to evaluate him, and then I'll try to let you know as much as I can. Um, and it was a complete shock. I had no idea. And so, as that time played out, we were at Ball Hospital in Muncie, Indiana. The doctors there began to evaluate him the best that they could. And what they could tell me was that it looked like he had a condition called midline cleft syndrome, which, if you know anything about cleft lip and cleft palate, that's definitely involved in that. But this is much more involved than just cleft lip and palate. They can have clefts all throughout their body in their various organs, in their eyes, in their bone structure, even in their brain. Um, they did tell me that they felt like Thane was mentally handicapped at that time, and it was going to be very obvious that he probably would end up needing a feeding tube because we were having great difficulty being able to feed him, even with special feeders made just for babies with cleft palates. So they sent me to Riley, and Riley gave me a little bit better description on what they thought was going on. In the meantime, when Thane was about 6 months old, we had a CT scan. Leading up to that point was very difficult. Thane just kind of laid. He didn't do much, he didn't interact much. To feed him was very difficult. He would choke the whole time. It was obvious that he was aspirating. He was getting aspiration pneumonia over and over again, which was really scary, in and out of the hospital for that. Um, but at 6 months old, they did a CT scan, and a doctor from Riley called me and he said, okay, so here's what we do know. We know that his brain is very underdeveloped. It only fills about half of what it should of the skull cavity. He has a major cleft in his skull. His brain, part of it is descending through that cleft. They call that an encephalocele. And he said that will have to be removed, and we will have to seal the skull, or he will always be susceptible to meningitis. Um, they did various tests on Thane's eyes. They told me that Thane was completely blind in one eye and at least legally blind in the other eye. He had what's called optic nerve hypoplasia, which means the optic nerves never fully developed. But then in one of his eyes, the optic nerves were also black and dead and not even connected. A condition called coloboma or morning glory syndrome, they call it. They took him in for a swallow study around that time as well, found that he had a cleft in his esophagus as well, and that's why he kept aspirating on the milk. Um, my sister had a baby a couple days after Thane was born, and so it was very obvious that Thane was not developing in the same way that her son Carter was. So when they told me that about his brain being underdeveloped, the doctor let me know. He said he will be severely mentally handicapped. In fact, we don't even know what his quality of life will be, even not just mentally, but with physically, with his movement and everything. And my family doctor had told me that it would be very likely that he would be like a vegetable. And so, which I hope that's, I don't know if that's an
That's it.
acceptable term
No,
anymore,
he
but
would
at
have
that
been in
time,
a vegetative state.
vegetative state, yes. So we began to pray very hard, pray and fast. My mom went on a long fast for him. And I remember it's about Christmas time, and my mom was holding my son Thane in one hand and my sister's son Carter in the other hand. And of course, Carter's kind of cooing and looking around and grabbing at things at this point, and Thane's just laying there with just a blank expression on his face. And mom began to cry and pray over him. I almost immediately began to notice a difference in Thane. He started rolling over. He started setting up. I mean, it was just amazing. You could see he would start to reach for things. It was like a light bulb turned on inside of him all of a sudden. We weren't scheduled for his skull and brain surgery for 3 more months. And so, over this 3 month period, we watched him just begin to change and change and change. So, I knew that God had done a miracle in his life already. But I couldn't wait to have the doctors tell me that to confirm that with scans and things. So that was an exciting point in our life. We still had the hurdle, though, the obstacle of him choking on his milk all of the time. He was losing weight. They were putting thickener and extra vitamins in his formula to try to help him put on weight. It was really dangerous. And so he had gotten aspiration pneumonia again, probably for, I think, maybe the fourth time. Um, we go to Riley for another swallow study, and the doctor tells me, Amy, we have to put a feeding tube in him. The Lord had already told me. Now, I was totally fine with doctors working on Thane. I'm not against physicians. But for some reason, God had told me, Amy, if you let them put a feeding tube in Thane, he will never grow right, he'll never develop right, and he'll never come off of having a feeding tube. It'll be permanent. So I looked at that doctor and I told him, I said, you're going to think I'm crazy. But the Lord told me no, not to let you do it, that he's going to heal him. The doctor was very kind and took me aside and he said, Amy, I'm a Christian as well. But he said, at some point, this is considered neglect. And I will have to turn you into CPS if you don't allow us eventually to put a feeding tube in him. He said, if he gets aspiration pneumonia again and you don't let us give him care for that, I will have to turn it in. And I said, I understand. Because of that act of faith, and I'm not trying to brag on myself, I just was willing to do what the Lord told me, even though it was so embarrassing for me as a mother to say that and so scary to say that as a mother. Because of that act of faith, he went from taking 45 minutes to taking two little tiny preemie bottles to only taking 15 minutes. He stopped choking. He started gaining weight. He never got aspiration pneumonia again. Now, the crazy part is this, and you'll hear this in another part of Thane's testimony. He still has a cleft in his esophagus. It never went away. But God is able to overcome any of those obstacles. And Thane can drink water. He's never had to have thickeners in his food, nothing. He's never again in his life, and he's now 22 years old. He's never gotten aspiration pneumonia again. And so that was one miracle. So again, he's beginning to develop and change. And I take him in for his 6 month checkup. He was a little beyond 6 months old at this point, to see the doctor. And Thane's sitting in my lap. and he is reaching for my earrings when my doctor walks in the door, and my doctor just immediately started crying. And he told me, he said, Amy, I don't know what's happened, but he said, I never thought he would be able to respond in this way and to interact in this way. And so that was just a really precious moment. But we go a few more months later. He's 9 months old. It's time to show up to Riley for his surgery, to have the cleft in his skull repaired, to have the encephalocele taken off, so that portion of his brain cut off. Before they go in, the doctors explained to me we want to do an MRI to look at the more intricate parts of what we're going to be doing and smaller blood vessels, things like that. They take him back for the MRI. We're waiting forever in this room with Thane. I can hear what's the person who's supposed to be our surgeon along with another surgeon, and they're out in another room or in the hallway, and they're going back and forth. I can just hear them whispering about how this can't be the same child, and they're comparing the scans from Ball Hospital 3 months beforehand and then these scans, and the doctor's saying, no, look at this is definitely the same patient. And they can't believe what they're seeing because Thane had been healed. Not only did he not have to have a cleft in his skull repaired or an encephalocele cut off, but they came back in to tell me that his brain was now fully formed. And so in 3 months' time, he had went from needing surgery on his brain and being severely mentally handicapped to now not needing any neurosurgery and functioning and developing as a normal baby. That was the next miracle. And by the way, again, he's 22. He's never had to have surgery on his brain. Never had. He's had multiple tests to check for leaking of cerebral spinal fluid. I mean, they took him back at 12 years old because he had a new doctor at Riley, and he couldn't believe it. He refused to believe that Thane didn't leak cerebral spinal fluid or have any issues. And so he ran a bunch of tests on him just to show that Thane was functioning totally fine, totally normally. So, anyways, the next miracle that we experienced was his palate. Um, they took him in to do surgery to repair his palate. He had a complete cleft palate. That means all the way up into his sinus cavity was cleft. In fact, in one part in the back, there was actual open exposure to the brain. He had such a complete cleft palate. So when they took him for surgery, they had already let me know that he would have to come back multiple times to have repairs because there's no way they were going to have enough tissue to form all three layers of his palate and it not form fistulas over time or need repair because it was such a complete cleft. He had been back in surgery for like 6 hours, I think, at this point, and the doctors actually came out to talk to me, and they said, okay, we're so sorry. We know you're probably scared. It wasn't supposed to take this long, but we found that he doesn't even have a pharyngeal flap in the back. That's where they take most of the tissue from in order to create these layers of palate. They said we actually almost cut into his brain tissue. They said we didn't. We caught it in time. But what this means is that we're going to have to take all of this tissue from his throat. It's going to be very painful for him. There's not going to be much there to work with, but we feel like we've already started this process. We're well into it. This is what we're going to have to do. So they created all three layers of his palate from throat tissue. They never once had to go back and have any repairs, never formed any fistulas. His palate grew beautifully, and that was it. Now, just like other kids that have cleft palate, he did have to go back once he got into his preteen years. They have to have an extension put in, but that's just part of their normal growth, and so he did. But he never, God fixed that to where he never had to go back for that. His lip, maybe we can insert a picture on this video. I don't know, but if you were to ever see Thane, you would have no idea he ever had a cleft lip. No idea. The repair is so beautiful, and again, just a one-time repair. So then that leads us to our next miracle.
The palate, when
Yes.
they did surgery, did they build the palate or did God make the palate?
So they went in and they put tissue together, but it's crazy when you look at it. It actually just looks like a little trampoline.
Okay.
So you've got this graft basically of tissue that's come from the throat, and then it's just stitched to the outsides of the mouth, and there's this open area where the tissues have to grow together. Does that make sense? And so very delicate, so delicate that they had his tongue sewed outside of his mouth so that he couldn't even touch his palate with his tongue because it was so delicate. But to have have it be already, even if it would have been under normal circumstances, they were saying he would have to go back for multiple repairs,
Okay.
let alone extraordinary circumstances like he had. The Lord just
It,
intervene. And so that's what was so unique about Thane's journey. There were some things that God was like, yeah, fine, let him have surgery. And then there were other things like with the feeding tube that God said, no, don't let them do that. And so it was such a walk of faith. Every miracle is different, you know?
right.
And so I learned so much through this one child and the obstacles that he overcame. But the next phase of this is probably, to me, the most spectacular. So his eye that was supposed to be legally blind, because the optic nerves, he had optic nerve hypoplasia, had 20/20 vision. And they found that out pretty early on, you know, as soon as he was kind of old enough to respond and talk to them about what he was
Mm.
seeing. Because at Riley, they'll just put images on a computer screen. They, you know, the kids don't have to read off letters. They're able to test them from the time they're really young, and they tell them, oh, I see a pony, or I see a birthday cake, or whatever it might be. So they knew he had 20/20 vision in his right eye. But in the eye that they told me that he was blind in, he was blind. We would test him every once in a while. We would pray over him, and then we would cover over his good eye, and we would say, Thane, can you see us? And he would say, no, I can't see anything. And this went on for many, many years. And so every once in a while, we would feel like, you know, we haven't checked him for a few years. Let's pray for him again and let's check it. And I think he was around 7 or 8 years old. And my husband, Frank, one day he said, Amy, you know what? We haven't prayed for his eye for a long time, and I feel like God's telling me to pray for his eye. And I said, okay. So he laid hands on him. And later that day, we were out in Frank's truck. And Frank had gotten out of the truck for some reason. We had a lot of kids. So we had kids in the back seat of the truck, and then Thane was in between Frank and I in the middle. And at one point, Thane goes, oh, that light is bright. It hurts my eye. And he covered over his blind eye. And I said, it hurts that eye. And he said, yeah. And I said, I covered his good eye. And I said, Thane, can you see mommy? And he said, Mommy, I can see you. And he said, I can see that clock. And he started reading the numbers off the clock. So we were super excited. And again, we knew that God had done a miracle, but Thane was supposed to go to Riley just a few weeks after that for an appointment to see Dr. Neely, his eye doctor. And we wanted for science to again confirm that there had been a healing. So we go in for his appointment. Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis is a teaching hospital. So they had an intern come in, and the intern tests Thane's good eye and writes down the prescription, and then the appointment's going to be over. And I said, can you please test his left eye as well? Can you test the other eye? And he said, well, ma'am, you understand, he's a monocular patient. The optic nerves in the eye aren't even connected, and they're black. There's no way he has vision in that eye. I said, no, please, will you test that other eye? And he said, okay. So he patched, they completely patch over the good eye, the right eye. And they pull up the very first image, and it's a birthday cake. And right away he said, Thane, can you see that? I said, yes, I can. It's a birthday cake. And that guy just about fell over. I mean, he just was like, okay, how is this possible? Well, then Dr. Neely comes in to check the prescription, to talk with us, check what the intern's done. And he asked the intern, he said, why do you have a prescription written out for this other eye? He's a monocular patient. And it was so funny. I'll never forget it, because he whispered to Dr. Neely, he said, he saw the birthday cake, as if he couldn't even say it out loud. So, yeah, so my son has an eye that the optic nerves aren't connected. Not only that, they're black and dead, and Dr. Neely even looked in the eye again and confirmed that, and yet he has vision out of that eye. So every moment that Thane sees out of that left eye, the Holy Spirit is causing it to happen. It's a creative miracle every nanosecond of every day, which is really beautiful to me. So Thane now is 22, works for Ball State University. He was a straight A student. He plays the drums. He preaches and ministers. He is healthy as a horse. The only thing he's on is thyroid medication, because our family has a horrible, horrible slow thyroid. But super healthy, works out all the time, total sweetheart, and an anointed man of God. And that's his healing testimony.
So when you went, like I was here when it was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
When you had faith, you've already said it. I was going to say, were you scared?
It wasn't just Fear. I think actually, there was that level of scared, but it wasn't really scared that God wasn't going to come through. It was afraid of what might happen with the doctors. What are they going to think of me as a mother?
Right.
Um,
What I'm getting at is what was your emotional condition and where you're like, God has got this and I don't care and I don't blah, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that definitely had my moments where I thought that way, like very God will give you righteous anger, especially when it comes to the enemy trying to attack your children
mm-hmm,
and take their life. And so there were times when I felt like I had that strength about me. Other times it did get very intimidating and I would have to fight through that.
okay.
And that's the thing, it's about consistency. It's about even when those times come, the enemy tries to put fear or doubt in your mind, or maybe something's looking, symptoms are coming back of this or that. It's not embracing that and
Let's
it's
talk about,
continuing to rebuke that lie.
okay, so symptoms, what happens when or if symptoms come back?
Okay. So I won't get into all my healing, but I had systemic lupus and myasthenia gravis, and God healed me of it. After my
Yeah,
healing,
if you want to get into it, you can, but
okay.
literally, we got plenty of time, but
After my healing,
yeah.
there were times when symptoms, familiar things, would start to come back on me: weakness, blurred vision, whatever it might be. And as soon as it would come back on me, the enemy would say, "See, I told you you weren't healed." And I would immediately, immediately take authority over it, call it out for the lie that it was, proclaim the truth over my life, and that was that I was healed. I know I was healed. And as soon as I would do that and take authority, the symptoms would leave me. But I had to walk that out. That was a period of time that I had to walk that out. In fact, I got infection in my body at one point. Doctors couldn't, they didn't know what was going on with me. All they knew was that all my inflammation markers had went way up again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like autoimmune disease again,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm really sick. I'm weak. At one point, I didn't know what was happening, but my blood sugar would drop so low I would go into convulsions on the floor. Kelsey had to call the ambulance out to get me. Um, I was a mess. And so the enemy is saying, it's back. Here you go again. You're weak. Your vision's blurry. Now you're having convulsions. Now, and my mom walked into the hospital room and she looked at me and she said, Amy, the Lord told me that this is the enemy trying to trick you into believing that your healing has left you. She had not told my dad yet, and my dad calls on the phone while she's still in the room, gives me the same word. It resonated in my spirit. I began to rebuke it. The blood work comes
What do you
back.
mean by rebuke?
Rebuke it. Literally pray out loud. Satan, you cannot take my healing. You will not cause me to doubt what I know God has already done. And so I don't care what the symptoms look like. I don't even care what the blood work looks like. I don't even care what a doctor comes in here and says.
Mm-hmm.
God is truth and everything else is a liar. And just praying that prayer and making that declaration, it those things have to go. They can't stay. The word of God gives us that promise and gives us that power, but we have to know that we have that power to begin with. I can't do that with fear in my heart. I can't do that with doubt that I'm a daughter of Christ. I can't do that. I have to do that knowing my position of authority and having confidence in who I am as a daughter of Christ. When I do that, the enemy literally has no right to stay, no legal right to stay. And so they came back in with the blood work and they said, "Oh, you have infection somewhere in your body.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know where it is. We can't find
Mm-hmm.
it, but we're going to put you on IV antibiotics."
Mm-hmm.
They did. All my numbers went back to normal. It was totally fine. But it was a smoke screen of the enemy
Oh, okay.
to try to get me to think that I wasn't really healed.
Right.
So you have to walk out of healing. And Thane, because Thane has done that for so many years now, when he gets sick, it lasts no time because he knows how to walk out of healing. Same way with me. I mean, I've gotten the same illnesses that other family members or people that I work with have gotten, and I get over in about half the time.
Okay.
I just know the Lord has taught me how to walk in divine healing.
And that comes from your experience,
Mm-hmm.
and then just knowing God said, listen, you don't, I'm going to put words in your mouth. You don't have to be sick. You need to fight this thing. Tell
Yeah.
it to go.
And I don't care how long it takes. I spent years praying for my healing from lupus and myasthenia gravis. I didn't know, but I had been sick from, well, probably the early 2000s when I got pregnant with Thane. Because what I had happened, the abruptions in the
Mm-hmm.
umbilical cord, that's a sign of lupus.
Mm-hmm.
I was very, my joints hurt, my whole body hurt. I didn't know that. I didn't get a diagnosis until like 2010. And then a couple years later, the myasthenia gravis diagnosis came. And so I didn't get healed until 2016. So for all those years, I was in and out of the hospital, in and out of the wheelchair, almost put on a ventilator. And believe me, we were praying because I knew I'd watched him heal my son. I knew he could heal my body. So I don't care how long it takes. Once that moment comes and you know that you've been touched by the master, and mine happened when I was up leading worship, you know that that healing has come.
What
You
was
felt that virtue flow. You had
what
to
was
take
that
hold of
moment
it.
when you were leading worship? What was
So so they had just released me from community hospital in Anderson. I was put in there because they thought they might have to put me on a ventilator because the myasthenia gravis was affecting my lungs so badly. They had doubled my medication, which the medication you take for that, it doesn't really heal you. It helps the acetylcholine um, production communicate between your nerves and your muscles, and it only lasts for about 4 hours, and then you have to take more. It starts to wear off. So for about 4 hours, you can talk a little bit better. You can open up your eyes bigger. For some people, if they are so weak they can't walk, they can actually get up and walk for a little bit. For me, I had just taken it. I'd showed up here to church, and I was determined to lead worship because that's what I am. I'm a worship leader. I got through practice, and I could tell that I was already starting to get weak. And I had only had the medicine in me for about an hour at that point. And this is double the dose of what I had been taking. I get up, I start to lead worship. I get past the first two songs, and it's getting so bad that my tongue was descending down the back of my throat and gagging me. That's what would happen. My throat muscles would just become so weak that I couldn't. I had to leave the stage because I felt like I was going to get sick because I was choking on my own tongue. Well, that had started to happen. I said, God, I really want to sing this last song for you. I had such a love for the song. It's the song It Is Well. It's Bethel's version of the old hymn, It Is Well. And I started singing it anyway. And out of that act of just, I guess, obedience, but also sacrifice for him, just showing forth my love for him, not caring what my body was doing in that moment, but just wanting so badly to give him this song, I felt strength all of a sudden come over me. And it started in my feet and ankles. And the way I describe it is like when you're watching Marvel's Iron Man and his suit starts to clamp on him, you know what I mean? And it's like closing up. That's what it felt like, just like all the way up my body. I could feel strength come into me. And I opened up my eyes for a second, and a woman, an elderly woman who always sits in the back of the church, had made her way all the way to the front of the church. And she was sitting on the stage. And when I looked at her, she goes, God is healing you right now. She mouthed it to me, and I said, I know. And I sang that song with strength and power in my voice, and I knew I was healed. What was really cool about that is I forgot that about a year before that, a missionary's wife had visited here at the church, and she told me, I was in a wheelchair at this point. We were eating a dinner after service, and she said, Amy, I feel like God's going to heal you someday when you're up leading worship. She had prophesied it to me, but I had forgotten that prophecy until the moment it happened.
Okay.
God brought it to pass. And so I laid down all my medication for lupus, all my medication for myasthenia gravis. I never took it again. And that was 2016. I have it journaled, and this is now 2024. So for those of you that are skeptics and say, well, those diseases can remit and regress, there's no way I would have been well for this amount of time, number one, because those remissions usually only last a couple of years. Um, and here's the other thing, when you remit and regress, you slowly get better and come out of it. I literally, in a moment, came out of it. I went from being the worst I had been, hospitalized, um, in a wheelchair for the most part. When I was leading worship that day, I was sitting on a stool, okay, to lead worship, from the worst I had been to radically healed.
There it is.
There it is.
All right, cool.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, usually people have people pray for them on screen, and I'm cool
Mm-hmm.
with that. But I want how how can you teach someone watching? Like you can pray for them, and that's cool. But what would you want to say to teach them to do it for themselves?
Okay. So here's the thing, there are men and women who are anointed for healing. And I believe that because I've been around people who are anointed to heal. Okay. And we all have that to an extent. We have that power from Christ to lay hands on the sick to see them recover. But I think so many times people wait on somebody special to come through and lay hands on them and to heal them. And you don't have to do that. In fact, what God is wanting from you is to show that you have active faith. So even the woman with the issue of blood, it wasn't necessarily about her touching Jesus's cloak, but or his gown, robe, whatever you want to say. It was about that act of faith, that act of knowing that if I can just make it to him, I'm going to be healed. That faith put into action that James talks about. You all have that ability within you to take hold of that because Christ took those stripes for you. They don't have to be given to you by somebody else. That gift of healing doesn't have to be given to you by somebody else. It surely can be, transferred and through the anointing, but you can take hold of it for yourself, just like you took hold of salvation if you're saved for yourself. If you haven't, that's another thing you can do. Salvation is available to you. Healing is no different. When I receive salvation, I go up and I profess my faith in the cross, in the resurrection of Jesus. I invite him into my life, into my heart. And when I do that, I'm saved through faith. The same thing happens with healing. Healing's already been purchased for you. You just have to receive it by faith. And so, like I said, I had been prayed for multiple times by other people. I had even been praying for it myself. But there came a moment when I felt, just like if you've had that moment of salvation, you feel that change. Okay, that moment came and I felt that change, that transference to me of that inheritance of wellness and healing. I felt it come on my body. In that moment, I responded by saying, I receive this just like I received salvation. I receive this. I can tell that I've been transformed. I can tell that I'm different, and I'm going to hold on to that now. And there's no devil in hell that can convince me otherwise. I'm going to hold on to it. Now, even if you walk away from that moment, okay, say you're in your room, or maybe you are in a healing line, or maybe a friend did pray for you, or whatever it might be. When you walk away from that moment, I don't care what your body's doing. I don't care if that tumor hasn't left yet. I don't care if that eye hasn't improved yet. If you know that transference was made and what Christ paid for with those stripes has now been downloaded to you, you hold on to it. If you do, it will happen. It will happen. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of it manifesting. But if God says it, it's going to happen. And that's your part in it. That's your part
Well, and if you're not saved and you want this, you can have it. Because actually, I think it tickles God to really mess with people
in it.
in a cool way. So you're like, he's like, hi, I like you. So
That
I
might
think,
actually be the beginning of your faith walk.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that this, dude, there's so many testimonies here, but this is one of the cooler ones. And so, you know, do the medicine thing. There's hope. Never quit, never surrender. And if this is the first time you've ever heard of this, apply it now for yourself. And if you want any help with this, call Tabernacle of Praise, Muncie, Indiana. Ask for Amy.
Reach out with your questions.
Yeah,
Ron can let me know what questions you have. I'd be happy to answer them.
yeah.
And I tell you what, if you've been believing for healing, it hasn't manifested, the last thing you need to do is walk in shame. Shame is a tool of the enemy, fear is a tool of the enemy, and it will keep you from your healing. Just know that it's going to manifest. So,
All right.
yeah.
That's about it, people.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. Give your heart to Jesus because he loves you.